here. Yep, cool. So, you've been fishing lately? I mean, are you
not
this keeping you from fishing a lot?
Oh yeah, yeah,
right.
Yeah. I got to go to Flamingo a couple weeks ago.
Cool.
I had a meeting down in Almirada, and I had buddies rolling into Flamingo, so I met them up there on a Friday night. And got to fish for 2 days.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. I'm actually going down to Chokoloskee tomorrow.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Poon fishing's good right now, from what I hear.
Yeah. We fished with Elmer. He's been slaying the snook. So
nice.
Yeah, it'd be good. Actually, I'm going with my wife, who doesn't really fish much, and his wife, who actually his wife fishes a lot. So it's kind of like a double date on a Tuesday in the middle of the week. So
that works.
That's the best.
We were supposed to go. What was that trip? About a couple months ago, right? And then we got rained out.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, and he was like completely booked. So he's like, I'm gonna have to book you guys to June. I'm like, all right. Whatever. So it'd be a lot of fun.
Holiday was over in the office today, and he was saying Poons showed up in his area. I told him I need to slip over there and try to get on the water for a day with him.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. All right. I'm going to officially introduce our episode here. So let me go through my rigmarole here. So this is the Connected by Water podcast, fueled by our very good friends at Papa's PLR Rum, who remind you never to be a spectator. If you haven't had the chance to drink our rum, you're truly missing out. This award-winning brand is not just an amazing rum and also a rye whiskey. It is just hands down the best family and brotherhood to be a part of. So let's all raise a glass to Papa's PLR.
Right? Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. We are a Waypoint hosted podcast. You can find us there or watch, listen. And do not forget to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Smash those like buttons and subscribe buttons. And before we introduce today's guests, as we always do, we would like to announce this week's Starbright Solutions Project Sea Safe Do-Gooder. So today we have a handful of Starbright Solutions team do-gooders out of Islamorada. So Islamorada once again taking the charge. So thank you, John Tamora, Mitch Harris, and Captain Dave Gallen from KK4 Fishing Charters. They've been retrieving a ton of Mylar balloons this past week in the water. So many balloons had happy graduation and congrats grad and all those like those. So apparently it was Mylar balloon graduation week. And just a friendly reminder that, remember folks, Mylar balloons do not go to heaven when you let them go. They land in the ocean or the Everglades and they kill things. So don't let your Mylar balloons go. Don't buy them. Whatever. So congrats to our Islamorada do-gooders. And one thing we want to do this week is we've been doing this a lot lately where we kind of focus like a local business champion, right? So cool. We're going to focus on Down Under Tiki Tours, and that's Tamara Young, who is the significant other of our good buddy Jim Ruback, the Pig Reaper. He's like a master griller. He calls himself the Pig Reaper. This guy is incredible. Like
So where's Jim in the barbecue?
Yeah.
So we're gonna do. Do you know Chip Sheehan?
Yeah.
So Chip is really good at making ribs too. And he when he came in for a podcast, So he comes in, he brings all these ribs, and he challenged Jim. So they're gonna have like a rib off. So eventually, like we're gonna get this done. So sorry, Tamara, I know this is your local business spotlight, but we love Jim too. So anyway, Down Under Tiki Tours does 2 hour, 4 hour, 6 hour, and 8 hour catered tiki tour cruises. And they have a pontoon boat that is a tiki hut with a full bar. And if in the Pompano area, you may have seen her going up and down the intercoastal here. It's great for parties, sunsets, and I would like everyone else to know that they are also a very conservationally minded business, which is super important to us. So www.downundertikitours.com. Check them out. Okay, today's guests, without further ado, we have Captains for Clean Water in the studio. So we had co-founder Captain Chris Wittman. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Daniel couldn't be with us today. He's a little under the weather. We have Director of Public Affairs and Policy, Jessica Pinsky. So, Jessica, thank you very much for joining us today. Captains for Clean Water. Where do I begin with you guys? I mean, so first of all, actually, tell me a little bit about your individual backgrounds, if you can. So, let's start with you. You've been a captain for years, right?
Yeah.
From Fort Myers, right?
Yep. Fort Myers, grew up there, grew up on Sanibel Island, and also first really appreciate being here. I'm a huge fan of your artwork and also everything you do for our communities, around the state. And
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very, very grateful for your support. Yeah, I was born and raised Southwest Florida, grew up on Sanibel Island, and ultimately, you live on an island, you grow up on an island, your whole life revolves around water and is surrounded by water, and ultimately became a fishing guide, and did that for almost 20 years. Fishing guide, tournament fishing. I was very fortunate to meet many of my childhood kind of heroes that became friends and mentors to me throughout that process, and ultimately led the journey to co-founding Captains for Clean Water.
I think that's like the greatest part about this industry is like you grow up like idolizing like certain people in it, and then you end up meeting them, and then you become part of like the family and the collective. Like
No, it's
to me, that's been the favorite part about being someone in the industry. That's just like, man, I
think that's the most unique. There's not very many things where your idols or heroes can actually, end up becoming your friends or your coworkers or your mentors. And we were talking before the show about, Derek Redwine, and I met him through Jose Wehebe, and it's like, it's a very unique industry. Very cool.
And that's been my favorite part about the show too. Yep. Is just like everyone that comes to the table. I mean, we're drinking rum, we're hanging out, and it's like just a chill vibe, and and then you just so many people I meet at the table, and that's sometimes like my favorite way to meet people, because then it's like you can have like this great conversation, and it's like it's like you feel like friends for life. So cool. Yeah. Jessica.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah, happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about you and how this kind of came about for you.
Okay, gladly. Thank you for having us. Love your art. Happy to be here and joining you guys, and this chill vibe, like you said. It's really awesome. So I worked in water policy before I was at Captains. And in 2016, when these guys were first getting started, I met them, and I was like, whoa, these guys are going to change the world.
Right.
And their energy, their passion, and everything, I was like, oh, wow, they're going to be change makers. And our paths crossed again. We were on the same side, working on the same issues, and our paths crossed again in 2020. They grew as an organization, and that was the year that I joined them. And it's not often that you get to wake up and do what you love every day. Mm-hmm. And I get to do that every day, and I'm passionate. I get to work with a bunch of like-minded people, and all making a difference. I come from an old Florida family, and from the panhandle of Florida, deep roots here, going back to the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Generations back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Multi-generational, and my family's still there in the panhandle. That's agricultural area predominantly. Mm-hmm. I come from a family that's involved in agriculture, and also a family of conservationists. So it was instilled at me in a young age. Grew up on the water in the Gulf of Mexico. Mexico Beach, may have heard of it.
Yeah.
My grandparents had a place there. Spent a lot of time on the Gulf down there. That was where we spent our summers. So it's near and dear to me. Water here in Florida is near and dear to me. And when I met these guys in 2016, I knew they were the real deal. And I was mesmerized by them and their energy and passion. And I felt like, we were all in it. We were all in this fight together. And like I said, they grew as an organization, and they were doing big things. And they said, hey, why don't you come join us? And so I did in 2020.
She's being polite. She's saying she knew what she meant. What she means by we stood out is we didn't fit in.
Right.
She has a very accomplished career in Tallahassee, and knows the lay of the land there. And,
right.
And when we were there, she knew that we did not did not fit in, and were a little outside the box.
Are we making a left or are we making a right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, but But no, it's we've been really fortunate, as we've gotten deeper into this effort. It was real obvious that we needed an expert in the policy world, and so for us to be able to bring Jess onto the team has been a huge asset for the movement and for this effort. And so
it's cool. Well, it sounds like you got the right background and all of it. I mean, it seems like this is your life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And so being able to marry those two backgrounds, my experience, like Chris said, in policy and navigating the political process and decision makers, and then combined with the passion, it's the perfect fit. So
that's cool. I don't have too much exposure to the Panhandle. I do have a little bit because my brother went to the University of West Florida.
Oh
right?
yeah.
So I would go up and visit him in Pensacola like a couple times a year when he was going to school there. He was like captain of the golf team and everything.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But the one thing I do remember about the Panhandle is like that's a completely different animal up there, like than the rest of the state.
It existed before the rest of the.
I know.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's like totally different, like part of the area, and like you kind of got it, like as a Floridian, you kind of got to get used to it. I mean, right down to the fact that the sunsets and the rises, like that, it was just kind of like freaked me out, like the first time I ever saw it. But it's pretty cool. The water's like super clean up there, for the most part. Right, so we're trying to get some of that down here, right?
Absolutely.
So, cool. So. Captains for Clean Water's been around for like 8 years now, roughly.
Well,
right?
Founded 2016.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think one of the coolest things about your organization is, achievements aside, right, of all the political stuff, is just your ability to rally together the fishing industry, the fishermen, the captains, like the whole thing like that. Because that really, once you did that, it's almost like that lit spark of, what they said, the sleeping giant kind of thing, right? So take me through, like, how'd that feel? Like when you guys, I know that, so Mike was on here for that, when we inducted Ray and Carl into the IGFA Tommy Gifford Award, and he brought up a really cool line, like, no one wakes up or is born going, I want to be an activist, right? And that's the thing that Mike always says, right? Yeah. So, but I think it's a pretty strong statement, why you should say it all the time, and then you're there, you obviously feel like something needs to be done, right? And you light a match and things catch on fire, right? Take me through that process, how'd that feel?
Yeah, first of all, it wasn't like, as a fishing guide, that was Daniel and I's dream job. So it wasn't like we woke up one day and we're like, you know what, we should take this hard right and become, start an organization. It was, it just got to the point that this issue that we had experienced our entire lives was getting worse and worse and worse. And ultimately, kind of was a water crisis in 2016 was the catalyst to going, something has to change drastically. We can't keep getting these massive discharge events from Okeechobee every few years and continuing to see, the ecosystem stair-step downward and decline and see the impacts to our businesses and to our way of life. And what we ultimately saw was that you've got this massive problem. There's a solution that's been in place since the year I became a fishing guide, and very little progress had been made. And the reality, what we saw was, and we really saw this by looking at ourselves. You got a kid who grew up on an island who's a fishing guide by career, and I'm not involved in trying to advance a solution to this issue that affects every aspect of my life. And the reason wasn't because I didn't care. The reason wasn't because I wasn't aware of a problem. I did not see a path of how an individual could make an impact on with such a massive problem. It was just like, there's this huge problem and there's nothing we can do about it, and we're screwed. And that was a pretty irresponsible way to look at it, but that was just the reality. And the more we talked with people throughout that water crisis in 2016, the more we realized that was the sentiment, not just of the fishing community, but of everyone across the state, that was impacted by this issue, whether we were talking to fishing guides or realtors or people that worked at hotels or restaurants, or maybe property owners and people that worked their whole lives somewhere else to retire here. All of those people were impacted, and very few of them were involved because they didn't either understand what solutions there were available, or they didn't have a pathway that they could meaningfully be involved. And so we identified that for decades there were scientists that had identified this problem and had mapped out this solution. There was engineering. There's the largest ecosystem restoration project in the history of the world. And the void was individual stakeholders who were impacted, who were absent. Their voices were absent. And so people like us. And so we had the thought that if everyone knew about this problem and everyone knew about the solutions available, that the problem would have been fixed a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And so if we could use education to get people to use their voice and get involved and then provide an outlet for their voice, that voice could fill that void that existed that was resulting in delay of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. And so that's really it started with Daniel and I, out of, I guess, part anger, part fear of, to Mike's quote, it's you don't wake up and say I want to be an activist, but if you're going to lose something that you love, then you're damn sure going to fight. And that's what led us to kind of go down that path, was realizing this wasn't a science problem. It wasn't an engineering problem. It was a public pressure and a political will problem. And if we could educate people and empower them to use their voice, that they could create public pressure, and that public pressure would fuel some political will to start, making some serious progress towards this plan to restore the Everglades, and in the process fix, save my backyard where I grew up.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that about giving people a voice and all that, because we're trying to obviously do a similar thing here mm-hmm. by bringing information to the forefront, because I think this is what I told you before, like we have this whole philosophy that I believe at the end of the day we all want the same thing, right? We all want clean water, we all want a healthy Florida, right? And whether it's fishermen or like you said, realtor or anybody, if you're a Florida resident, especially if you're a native Floridian, like we all are, then there's a lot of pride at stake there too, and,
absolutely,
and we all want the same thing. And I always look at the end of the day, I really think like the biggest problem with this is the sprawl and like the growth that's been perpetrated into the inner part of the state and the land and everything like that. That's been a big issue, but that's another.
That's a huge issue.
Yeah. That that's different than some of the things that you guys are facing now, because that's almost like, okay, that happened. You can't reverse that necessarily, really.
But we can certainly, not repeat the mistakes of the past and continue it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and listen, I'm an artist, right? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a politician. I'm not a environmental engineer. You know what I mean? So I don't claim to be, the science expert or the mathematical expert on any of this stuff. I'm basically saying, yeah, I grew up here as a fisherman, diver, surfer, skateboarder, whatever the case may be, and just a concerned citizen. And I'm of that school of thought that when you're faced with crisis, that you just don't sit on your ass and just let it happen. So here we are, right? So thank you guys very much for coming in.
No, thank you.
A lot of what you guys say is send it south, right? And in some regards, that could be a broad statement, right? That might need some clarification. So when you guys say send it south, can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, and it is a broad statement, but it's a if you look at the Everglades system and the flow of water, mm-hmm. before man put his fingers on it, the water flowed south from the Kissimmee River Valley all the way through Lake Okeechobee, through the River of Grass, ultimately all the way to Florida Bay. And once man went in, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and started trying to drain that Everglades system and compartmentalizing that system, the water can no longer make its way in the volumes that it needs to Florida Bay. It gets held back in Lake Okeechobee. The lake gets too high, which is very bad for the lake. It gets dumped out to the coast, which is very bad for the coast. The Everglades Florida Bay is starved of that fresh water, and the Everglades sees these, big swings in hydrology. And so when we say send it south, it's we need to get the water back all the way to Florida Bay, the way God intended, the way nature had designed. And ultimately, that's what Everglades Restoration, or the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, known as SERP as the acronym, that's what it does, is it removes those barriers to flow, reconnects the system that's compartmentalized, and gets that water, once all those suites of projects are completed, gets that water hydrological connection restored from the Kissimmee River Valley all the way back to Florida Bay. It doesn't do it in, the full, we're not just wiping out communities and developments that are established, but it returns that timing and delivery and conveyance of water back to getting water that is needed all the way down to Florida Bay. And so send it south means getting the water that is held up throughout the upper part of the system, ultimately all the way down to Florida Bay.
Okay. All right, cool. And so a lot of what you guys face with is very political, right?
Yep.
And it's very, which could always say, like, there's so much going on right now regarding this topic, like this topic and many other related, like, ancillary topics, that are kind of like around, right? That it could be viewed as a very tangled web, because a lot of people have a lot of involvement, let's say to speak. So part of your guys' battle is fighting in Tallahassee, right?
Correct.
What kind of challenges are you facing with the whole aspect for Send It South, and or what kind of challenges have you faced already that you've been able to overcome, or maybe are still presenting themselves as challenges to you with the whole Send It South aspect?
Right. I think I'll start. Let me give you the broad overview, like the 30,000 foot view. So, historically, when Chris and Daniel got involved and started Captains for Clean Water, like Chris stated earlier, the attitude was by most politicians was, why not? Let's push it, kick the can down the road. Is the way I would describe it. SERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, existed. We knew that it was a solution to stopping those, to beginning to, alleviate those damaging discharges to both coasts that the East Coast and the West Coast of Florida were experiencing. But nothing had been done about it. And we knew that project needed to happen, not only for the benefit of working to alleviate those discharges, but also to restore that flow and to keep that aquifer, hydrated, so that it's a drinking water supply of 5 million people in South Florida. But what happened is there wasn't the political will back then, because it was kick the can down the road. But once once those discharges started happening, and that affected, water, our water is our economy here in the state of Florida. I mean, it is our currency. It is what we make a living on. It is the lifeblood of Florida's economy. It's
what I named my entire business after.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Every piece of artwork hanging on the wall in here is.
And I think that piece of the puzzle, it finally clicked, is, we're screwing our own selves. We're messing up this water, and, these fishing guides, they can't fish. They're not filling charters. Recreational boating is down. When the water's dirty, nobody wants to go out on the water. So it was a trickle down effect, and that trickled into, inland businesses and the entire state. And so, that kick the can down the road attitude, it was like there was these voices that rose up, and not just Daniel and Chris, but, there are other organizations that have been working on Everglades restoration for years. But the combined voice, those guys combined with, we talked about it earlier, the realtors, the fishing guides, the hoteliers, the restaurant owners, everybody was like, wait, something's got to change. Something's got to happen. And Captains for Clean Water provided that umbrella for them all to come under and band together and create that change, at the political level. Then all of a sudden you have a face and you have a voice and you have different constituency groups that are advocating for that solution, right? Mm-hmm. And that is what Captains started the revolution, so to speak. And it has continued. Now, we have benefited from, great political wins. In the meantime, we've, record funding out of D.C., a governor here in the state of Florida who has, led the charge on this, and record levels of funding here in the state of Florida. But that's all happened, and all the while that is happening, you've had Captains that's been able to unite those realtors, those restaurant owners, those hoteliers, those outdoor industry brands, Costa, Yeti, Sims, Papa's Pilar. I mean, all these, Starbright, everyone that is affected and their business depends on clean water. And I think, I know Captains has been, that overarching big tent that everyone has been able to come together. And that's what, at Captains, you asked about what we've been working on. And that's what we've been working on, is we've been working on organizing those different constituency groups within Captains for the purpose of advocating to create, change and to create that solution. And, we've been very successful in doing that. And it's a model that we're constantly tweaking. We're constantly, honing in on different things. We have an incredible, digital team at Captains, media team, outreach, our outreach and engagement team that works with all of the guides and captains all over the state. We're constantly tweaking things and educating ourselves and learning and relying on data to how we can, work better for all of you and for the goal of that clean water.
Yeah. So. And to that point, I think that was one of the big things I was saying earlier, like really like a huge accomplishment of this organization alone, even if there are no achievements or anything like that alone, is just the rallying together of the fishing community and raising the awareness and just bringing to the forefront, like, hey guys, we have a problem and it affects all of us. Is just that alone is just a huge accomplishment.
It's ultimately that's the role the organization plays, is unifying all the people who are impacted and affected and care about this issue and giving them a unified, focused voice to drive progress.
Yeah. Now you brought up DeSantis, right? And got him on my list here because I want to bring this up. Now, I'm a fan, right? And I think part of the reason that I'm a big fan of his is that right on day one, when he stepped in as governor, the first thing he did was, I need to address the Everglades, right? And so he basically made that like his priority. And then throughout the state, and setting precedent and providing record-breaking financial numbers and funding for everything needed to get projects done was just a huge accomplishment. And for someone like himself that grew up here and grew up kind of in that area too, yep. I think he really had a very, very good eye on what it was like, where it was heading, and he saw the writing on the wall and everything that needed to get done. So you guys have worked a lot with him very closely,
yeah,
right? And even in for like Hurricane Ian, we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, and that was the project that we worked on with you guys with the shirt fundraising and everything like that. And I loved that fund that you guys put together to provide money for the captains that were out of work in Fort Myers. I thought that was a huge thing that you guys did, because it was really important. Because, when things like that happen, obviously it's unfortunate, and there's a lot of people that are affected by it. But you guys had the wherewithal to be like, no, you know what? There's a huge base of charter captains and people making a living on the water in that area that are just going to suffer, and they're not. Who's going to go fishing out there for the next 3-6 months or however long it's going to take to kind of build that back up, and hire a guide, so being able to provide, that's why we didn't hesitate to put the money towards that fund for that. So, but Governor DeSantis was involved with you guys in that as well, right?
Oh yeah, very closely, and thank you for that support. We felt that the fishing guide community, it's where Daniel and I came from, and their voice is very, very important in this issue. They're canaries in the coal mine. They notice the subtle changes. They notice the big changes. They can be a connection between ecological impact and issues and the economic repercussions of those ecological issues. And so for us, we saw the impact that it doesn't just have to be fishing guides, but those businesses that depended on clean water and healthy ecosystems, we saw the impacts that they suffered from a water crisis, right? We've seen people go out of business because of poor water quality issues. And what we realized was if you had an event like the water crisis we had in 2018 going into 2019, which was during the gubernatorial election that the governor, made this his cornerstone initiative. If you had an event like that, and then you have a hurricane that decimates my hometown, and those fishing guides are not going to be able to survive just blow after blow after blow. And if we lose them as a voice, and the guys that are out on the water every day, not only to be the voice of what they're seeing and what's happening, but also to be the mechanism that gets people to enjoy and experience that resource. And the enjoyment and experience of the resource ultimately is what's going to get people to want to fight to save it. If we lost them, that would be a huge blow to this effort. And so it was one of these things where it's like, look, our entire communities, Fort Myers Beach, Estero Island, Sanibel, Boca Grande, Pine Island. That
was a horrible hurricane.
It was annihilated. And if we're not going to sit there and message on, Everglades restoration at that point. So we had this responsibility to our core that we can deviate from what our mission is and what our day-to-day operations are. I mean, there's people on our team that their houses were vaporized. Noah, who makes our films, I mean, I went and visited his home on Pine Island with him for the first time that he got to see it. There was nothing left. And
that's crazy. Meanwhile,
he was out, handing out coolers and gasoline to people. It was we just saw that we had an opportunity and a responsibility to try to help that community sustain a little bit to where they had the opportunity to rebound. They're super resilient. And so that's why we set up that fund. Look, we can't legally take normal operating resources from the organization for Everglades restoration educational and put it out to the community. But all these people like yourself were reaching out wanting to help. And so we set up a fund where every single penny, we absorbed the operational expenses of our team, and every single dollar that came into that fund was put right into the community and into the hands of the fishing guides. Brands, many of the biggest brands in the industry stood up and sent actual product, where we turned our office into a makeshift store for several months, where fishing guides and their families could come in and they lost everything they owned. They could come in and get some clothes for their family and a little bit of a morale boost and pick up that, like, there's people here for you. you've been completely knocked down, but we're here for you. And so, it's not anything that was, ultimately we spread it out. It's not any huge amount of money that went into anyone,
right?
But
it
was just a
helps,
lifeline.
Yeah,
yep.
for sure.
And so, and so we're very grateful to not only your effort, and those shirts you made. I mean, it wasn't something we called and asked you to do. It was something that you did. And you said, hey guys, here's this thing we did. Hope it helps. And we saw that same type of effort from across the country. From how special this community is. We saw that, and the outpouring of support came in from a lot of places. And ultimately, it was over $700,000 that came in.
That's
and every
great.
single dollar went to helping those people's families make it through a tragedy.
Yeah, those
That's
shirts
awesome.
were awesome.
Yeah, that it really was a great effort. Like all in all, like from beginning to end on the whole thing. And I actually have to say that it wasn't even like the shirt drive that we did too. The Papas was involved with helping
absolutely.
us out too. So I want to make sure that they
get
credit
Mike
on that.
Myatt and the guys at Papas are huge supporters of ours.
Yeah.
And
I was
huge,
talking to
great
Mike
friends of ours.
because what happened was we did when I quit my day job like 12 years ago, whatever like that, and we opened up, it was Dennis Friel Art Studios, or DFAS, right? And about 5 years ago, my partner came in and I said, well, listen, I want to start this company because I feel like the work we do in the community is more than just an art studio. So we named it Connected by Water because community is a big deal to us. So we always felt like, okay, well, we have to put like our efforts where our mouth is with the name Connected by Water, because that's what it means to us, right? And Hurricane Dorian hit in the Bahamas, and everyone rallied up for that. And I remember when that hurricane was just stalling on Grand Bahama, I could almost hear screams in my ears. I was like, man, because it wasn't moving, it was just standing still. And we were all boarded up. We thought we were going to get hit with this thing, and it ended up not hitting us, right? It just hit them and went off. And I told my wife, I'm like, I got to go in the studio. So I did a shirt design real quick, and I said, I just threw something on Facebook. I said, hey, these guys are going to need some help, you know what I mean? So let's see what we can do. We raised $40,000 in 2 weeks in shirts. I was like, whoa, are you kidding me?
Yep.
And we were designing our website for the new company at the time, and we had taken the old one down, and we didn't even have a website. I literally took every transaction through a QuickBooks invoice. It was a nightmare handling that, right?
You went back in time.
Yeah, it's 100%. So this time around, I said to Maya, I called up Mike, and I was like, hey, it's kind of a pain in the butt for us, but I think we're going to do another shirt drive for the Ian guys and stuff like that. And he's all, I'm all behind it. So with their help and the fact that we actually had a website up at the time, it was a lot easier the second time around. But anyway, I didn't want to talk about us.
Well,
that's great.
And I mean, the thing is, that's one of the things, Mike as a person and Papa's as a brand, he's always there. This is his community. He's always there we're very, very
100%
grateful for that. But so it was interesting. You make the connection, the impact we had from Ian and working with the governor and DeSantis in that. One of the things that we try to be a resource for policymakers, for the agencies that are making the decisions around Everglades restoration, around water management, around water quality, and especially for the governor and the governor's office and his team, seeing as that this is their priority and their legacy, and it's the most important issue there is to us. And so throughout that relationship, it's kind of the governor's office. We're able to be a resource from them. This is how these discharges are impacting these communities, these businesses. And so I think when the hurricane hit, it was just natural. We were kind of cut off from communication. Me, Daniel, our team that are housed in, ground zero of the hurricane. But Jess was over on the East Coast, and
Hollywood.
The communication, Mike Holliday's over here, Benny Blanco's over here. The communication lines were still functioning, without Daniel and I's, direct input all the time. And so immediately the governor's office was able to get in touch with us. Just like we're a resource with these water quality issues, we could be a resource of what's going on, where are needs, how can we get in. And so I think it was probably the second day or so after the hurricane. It was 6:30 in the morning, and I got a call from the governor's office, from their advanced team, and saying, hey, we want to go here to see what are the most critical needs. Can you help us figure out what are the logistics? How can we get there? Where can we land a helicopter? And so from that day, there was probably about 10 days in a row where every single day it was a call from the governor's team. I would get on a boat or in an aircraft or something, get out to helping them get into the different parts of the community, identify what the most critical, urgent needs were, and then they were in real time just dispensing the resources to address those. And it was pretty amazing. You saw the impact of that hands-on approach by that administration. That you had the main lifelines. You had the bridge to Sanibel Island, where I grew up.
Well, like
washed
it
out
up in like a day, right?
Washed
like 2
out,
days.
gone.
You had that bridge.
So people could not get on and off the island outside of a boat or a helicopter rescue. The bridge to Pine Island, where I based my guide business out of, gone. And so and then you had the power and the infrastructure around, the power. So it was just really wild to see how fast government moved, where typically there's nothing fast about government. It's red tape, and it's slow. And so seeing that come in, seeing their team be able to come in, physically see the on the ground, talk to people that were impacted, going, these are our greatest needs. And within, a few days, a few weeks, getting those bridges temporarily repaired. They were flying in power trucks onto the islands to start doing repair on the power grid system to get it safe for people to be moving around and operating in there before the bridges. They're flying them in under helicopters. It was pretty wild. But
it's nice when our government or our governor used to run SEAL teams and has that kind of experience that they're about to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we just kind of pivoted our relationship as a resource to the governor's office into dealing with that catastrophe, and we're grateful for the attention. And
that's cool. So are you guys still kind of working together with the governor on a lot of the issues that we're facing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's been a champion on this. We've seen Jess can speak to the impact out of Tallahassee, but the limiting factor to Everglades restoration the first 16 years, where very little happened, was there wasn't enough money being allocated to the agencies at the state level or the federal level to build any of these massive projects. And so
you're talking primarily on the SERP program, right?
Yeah. If you look at SERP, it's over 68 infrastructure projects that together will reconnect the capacity of that water to flow all the way to Florida Bay. And there was insignificant funding going to projects, and then the funding, even that little bit of insignificant funding, was going to ancillary projects that weren't politically challenging. And so you basically just had 16 years of the first half of what the estimated time span of that 30-year suite of projects, where very little meaningful action was happening. And looking at what Governor DeSantis has done is made it a priority, starting with, one of his very first actions in office was to call for the resignation of the entire governing board of the Water Management District, who wasn't acting in the best interest of the Everglades, which is the entire reason that agency was founded, was to restore the Everglades.
Right.
And so called for their resignation, replaced them, and then since followed up with record funding year after year to that agency to expedite those huge projects. That's had an impact, where we've seen record funding out of Washington, D.C. under both President Trump and President Biden. And so that was really what got the ball rolling there was significant money. If you look at the Army Corps of Engineers building the EAA reservoir, which is like the cornerstone of all these projects, it's the heart of Everglades restoration. You're looking at like a $2.5 billion project. It's the largest single project that the Army Corps of Engineers has ever built. It's a reservoir that you could put the footprint of Manhattan. You could fit Manhattan inside of this reservoir.
Really?
And so
let me ask you this. So there's like 68 like similar projects, they say, right? Did I get the number right?
Yep.
Yeah. Right. So what makes the EAA reservoir kind of like the Big Daddy or whatever?
It provides the greatest ROI of any of the projects individually. Okay. And so they all, in order to really get the full benefits of Everglades restoration, you have to have all of them. Mm-hmm. But the EAA reservoir is kind of like, without that, the other ones provide very little benefit. And so that reservoir, coupled with the ability to, remove barriers to flow south, reduce the discharges to the coast, bring water levels down in Lake Okeechobee, rehydrate the Everglades, the Biscayne Aquifer, and deliver more water to Florida Bay. It's kind of like it's like this flow equalization basin that instead of the lake filling up and having nowhere to put the water,
right,
and until you discharge it to the coast, they're able to take that water into that reservoir throughout the wet season, then meter it out to the Everglades and Florida Bay throughout the dry season.
It's easier or more beneficial to, like, if I'm hearing it correctly, to make more discharges like more frequently, or is discharges the wrong word to use?
No, yeah, it is the wrong. Instead of those big damaging discharges to the coast in the wet season.
And that's when the water raises really high. That's
in the
what
lake.
Kills the lake because the light can't get in and all that, right?
Exactly. And so right now you've got where water managers can only manage, they're constrained by the infrastructure available to them. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that project it brings so much benefit is it's the biggest project within the system that gives water managers the most capacity to do something with that water. And so that the way that's intended to function is take water from Lake Okeechobee throughout the wet season, that reservoir fills up, and then it's metered out through an engineered wetland, a stormwater treatment area, basically a man-made filter marsh, out through the dry season. And so what it does is instead of discharging to the coasts, it's sending that water into that reservoir. Right. And then the really important part of it is then instead of the Everglades of Florida Bay being starved of water throughout the end of the dry season, this extends that hydro period into the Everglades and into Florida Bay. And so if you look back at that system before man went in and drained it and ditched it and did all the
before the dike was built,
the hydro period was very long.
Back in like 1935 or something like that?
Yeah, actually it was.
Or was it earlier than that?
It started in the late 1800s when there was the first attempts, but the real bulk of it happened in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
1920s, 30s. But if you look at that, the hydro period, when Lake Okeechobee would overflow its water and feed the river of grass, and the sawgrass prairie essentially was where the Everglades agricultural area sits, the EAA. That was the sawgrass prairie, and that water would flow through there. And so what it did was it was very slow and it was very shallow, and the water that would exit the south end of the lake through the wet season would slowly feed down to the Everglades to Florida Bay. And so when you look at Florida Bay, the peak of that water that they were getting was actually like in December. And so what it was such a slow system that it stretched out the wet period and where it was never these big high points, but it was just this long, slow, shallow river of grass. Mm-hmm. And the water would kind of buffer into where by the time it started to taper off in December, it tapered itself off through the wet season to where by the time it started getting low flows, you were entering the wet season again. That's what the EAA reservoir does, is it gives water managers the ability to mimic what the natural system would have functioned like as far as it stretches the hydro period
to
out.
Authentically imitate with the wet season and the dry season.
Exactly. Instead, right now, what you see is you have these big peaks and valleys where you have a ton of water in the system and then not enough water in the system. And if you look at like the central Everglades, when you have too much water there, it inundates the tree islands. You have these barriers to flow, like US 41 is really the big one right now. then you would have where it would get so dry that the peat soils would oxidize. That system shouldn't be really, really deep, and it shouldn't be completely dry. It, in the end of the dry season, it would be low, but the peat soils would still be hydrated. And so that's what this does, is it takes the man-made peaks and valleys of shortening the hydro periods and making them these extremes, and it stretches them out back to closer to way nature had it, where it's extended and not as high and not as low.
So all right. So on the Lake Okeechobee side of it, right, with the water's like really, really high, like nobody wants that to be high, right? So who's deciding to keep it?
Well, the only people
high?
that want the lake to be that high is the sugar industry.
Okay.
They see the lake as a water supply reservoir for them. They're the only.
So they can mandate that happens?
No, they don't mandate, but that's what they advocate for.
Okay.
And you talk about, prior that when we talk about that void of the people being involved, prior to people really having a voice and being engaged, the industrial sugar industry, it's a consolidated industry. It's in essence two big, massive corporations, and then a co-op that, they could dictate politics because they're up walking the halls with 70 plus lobbyists handing out campaign checks. And if they saw something as a threat to water supply, and meaning that if water was going to something like the Everglades, then it wasn't available to them, they could kill it politically. And so it wasn't until the people who do all want the same thing, which is clean water and healthy ecosystems, got their voices got involved, that we started to see progress. So I would say, to your point of like, we all want the same thing. I absolutely agree with you. Everybody who is in this for the places they love, whether you're talking about the coastal fishermen, the fishing guides, whether you're talking about the people that live around Lake Okeechobee, fish hunt Lake Okeechobee, whether you're talking about the Gladesmen, the Miccosukees, the Seminoles, the folks in Florida Bay, the people that need Biscayne Aquifer for their drinking water supply, like you, they all want the same thing. The sugar industry wants the status quo. I don't care who you bring in here that is from any of those stakeholder groups that I just mentioned. Ask them if the status quo is working. It's acceptable. None of them are going to say yes. And the only entity that's pushing to maintain the status quo is big sugar, is the sugar industry. And so they do that through a couple of means. They do it through misinformation, with the intent to create either division, right? If they can get the East Coast fighting the West Coast, or the inland communities
and
fighting.
The division is what we don't want.
Exactly.
That's our goal.
Our goal is to unify.
Bringing everyone that we bring in.
To unify.
Yes, exactly.
We need
to get everyone talking about the same thing here.
The Gladesmen, the coastal fishermen, the Lake Okeechobee community, the Keys community. We need everybody unified. And you asked Jess earlier, what's the biggest threat to Everglades restoration? It's division. And so if you want to maintain the status quo, and you're seeing that the reason progress is happening is because there's this massive unified voice saying the status quo is not acceptable, we need to fix this problem, and there's a solution to fix it. If you're looking at maintaining the status quo, it's, well, how do you break that unified voice? And it's if you can put narratives out there that get the East Coast fighting the West Coast, saying, the West Coast isn't getting the discharges because all the rich people live on the East Coast, and you tell the people on the East Coast is going to get discharges because the people on the West Coast don't want them, or you tell the people around the lake's so high because the coastal communities don't want the water. Or you tell the people in the Glades that they want to flood you out, because if you can create these narratives where you get stakeholders who are unified in what they want, clean water, healthy fisheries, healthy ecosystem, fighting each other, then they're not fighting against the policies that are maintaining the status quo. And so that is a real effort that comes out, and that's the division part. The other part is deflection. And you'll see where you have these massive issues. Florida it's dying from 1,000 paper cuts. You talk about urban sprawl, development. You talk about, failing wastewater infrastructure.
Derek and I talk about this all the time, and that's exactly the
these
analogy
things,
that he gives
right?
to death by 1,000 cuts.
So there's all these things that are impacting, and all of those things need to be addressed. But if you look at what are I kind of relate it to, you're getting these constant paper cuts, but with these discharges that happen to the coasts and the lack of water that can be sent to Florida Bay, those are like getting a broadhead through your kidney every couple years. And it's like, we're not going to survive fixing the paper cuts if we keep getting trauma to the system, both ecologically and economically. And so that's why Everglades restoration is so important. And if you look at that, one of the things that the sugar industry does is they want to get people playing whack-a-mole or eye off the ball. And so we are very conscious about identifying, look, we don't have any less septic tanks in Fort Myers than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We don't have any less septic tanks over on the East Coast. Those need to be addressed. But our economy and our fisheries aren't crippled every single year. They're crippled when we get those massive damaging discharges.
So the algae blooms are horrible.
Those were a result of massive discharge. They don't happen every single year. So the point being, those other things have to be addressed, and they are getting addressed. But what the sugar industry likes to do through proxies is get people out there pointing at all these other issues, so that it's not pointing back at, look, here's this big gorilla of a problem that is crippling communities and crippling the system. It's, look at this sewage spill. Look at it's deflection, and you'll see that through, that's that misinformation or it's not even those are true problems, but it's a deflection. It's like, no, look over there, look at these other problems. That's one of the other threats that Everglades restoration has to overcome, is those other things have to be addressed. But if you've got a victim, the Everglades, Florida, that's on the operating table, and they've got a broken leg and, some lacerations and they're also suffering from a heart attack, we better address the heart attack, or else the victim's going to die. And so that's Everglades restoration, is that's handling the trauma. And if we can restore the connection of water, and put those estuaries back into where they can recover, we can handle the trauma. Then we can also get it to recover from the other thousands of paper cuts.
And those other paper cuts, like the upgrading of these, I know here in Broward County, it's a big problem here. The upgrading of the infrastructure, the sewage infrastructure.
Yeah, that's actually a really big problem in Fort Lauderdale specifically.
Right, Fort Lauderdale specifically. We've done outreach there. We've spoken at events there. Absolutely. In the past, I would say the state in the past probably 6 years has done more to advance. I'm not saying that there's not more that can be done, or there's not more that's needed to be done, but rules have been rewritten at the agency level about how what happens, how those municipalities are fined for when a sewage spill occurs. Money, there is a plethora of money on the table now coming down from Tallahassee. I mean, you talk about record amount of money just with Everglades infrastructure, but also for money for municipalities to upgrade that sewage infrastructure. So, the paper cuts, there are things that are being done right now to improve, to improve those. Yes, we're not going to stop people from moving to Florida. It's the greatest state in our nation.
Can we please?
I don't think, unless we lock the...
It's too many.
I mean, I don't know how we're going to stop them from moving here, because the secret's out. They know how great it is here.
We got, 23 million, 22 million, something like that.
Something like that,
right?
Yeah.
In the entire country of Australia, there's 28 million people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we could put some big gates on 75 and 95, maybe. One way. No.
Don't get Chris's wheels spinning, because I can see him now. He's going to go home and then...
No, but one of the things that's happened is because there's been such attention brought to this massive trauma problem of Everglades restoration and these discharges and the need to get water to Florida Bay, it has shown policymakers that that's really important to their constituents. And as a reciprocal impact, they've also seen that there's these other issues that are impacting their constituencies or their districts that are outside of Everglades restoration that also need attention. And so by elevating the attention on the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world around Everglades restoration, you're also elevating just the value of water quality projects and initiatives as a whole.
Yeah.
And so as we've seen that funding for Everglades restoration click up year after year after year, you're also seeing funding for other projects like, septic to sewer conversions, wastewater treatment upgrades. You look at Indian River Lagoon, Mosquito Lagoon, where you get $100 million a year coming out of Tallahassee now to address water quality issues in that water body. So there is a kind of a ripple effect impact of this massive problem and this massive opportunity within Everglades restoration that is also helping to shine a light on all those other
water quality
issues that need to be addressed as well. And you're starting to see money and resources flow to those other issues as well.
And that's what gives me hope, is that, okay, now the state is very invested in this,
yep.
right? And they're going to have to see it through, hopefully. I mean, there's always going to be corruption.
Well, policymakers are seeing that they're looking for wins.
Sure.
And they're seeing that water quality is something that their constituents see as a win, and it's something that is attainable, that they can put resources to, that can be a feather in their cap. And whether you're talking about upgrading a wastewater plant in Tampa Bay, or converting septic to sewer, or you're talking about sending water south to the Everglades, it's all of those things they're seeing as those are valuable things that are achievable, that they can fix by putting money and resources to the agencies that are in charge of fixing them.
Yeah, I think smart politicians heard the voices saying, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, I'm voting clean water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they really heard that, you know what I mean? And that was, to your guys' credit, also rallying the troops and getting that. I think people heard that message, right? And, that's why I keep saying, like, individual wins aside, like you said earlier, the 30,000 foot view on Captains for Clean Water, I think is just the general voice, you know what I mean? And the movement and representing, like,
there's somebody
the watermen,
else out
the
there.
fishermen, and everything like that, and giving them like a collective kind of push. I think that's the most important thing, really, that you guys bring to the table.
And look,
that's not to mean anything that you guys have accomplished specifically.
No, and Captains for Clean Water is one spoke on a wheel. It's not this whole movement towards clean water is not. Captains for Clean Water is one little part of that. It's the collective effort across the entire community, across the state, that's achieving that. We're one spoke that fills one piece of that, but all the other organizations and efforts and communities and everybody that's out there pushing, it's a group effort. And Everglades restoration is a very unifying thing. It's got bipartisan support. I mean, you look in Washington D.C. right now. I don't think unified is a word you would use to describe anything that goes on.
I don't think that's the first word that comes to mind.
No, but when you see, a request for Congress to fully fund Everglades restoration come out of Florida, and it's got, every single congressional member of the Florida delegation signing on to that letter, name another thing that Matt Gaetz and Debbie Wasserman Schultz are signing on in agreement.
Well, there was actually one thing recently, the wilderness designation, right, was another thing that to them, and FWC got involved, and everyone to not designate the Western Everglades and Big Cypress as wilderness. So I think like in that regard, it's kind of, I guess, kind of related because it's all like a win for Florida, like we see, you know what I mean? So I think positive things are happening in Florida when you start looking at them like that, and like I really feel like we're moving forward, even though we have battles in front of us that we talked earlier on the phone, right? There's never going to be this big victory party and it's over, right? No. There's never going to be the Super Bowl party and
it's never over,
won.
Unfortunately.
Like conservation is an ongoing battle, and it always will be to the end of time, especially as more people enter the planet and our state and all that, and the more people you add to it, obviously the more sprawl you're going to get, and it's always going to be something that's going to have to be fought. So like it's an ongoing effort, but I really think that Florida's moving in the right direction on a lot of levels, even though we're getting a lot of people moving here all the time. I think that's where all the actions that have been taken are almost kind of saying to the people that are moving here, like, no, this is who we are. This is a part of our identity now. Like, whether you want to call it environmentalism or conservation or preservation or restoration. Yes, all the above. That's kind of like our identity now, and it's our brand. So like you always got to put that in the forefront before you really talk about anything regarding Florida. And I just want to bring up one other thing regarding that too. I think a lot of this has to do with generationally speaking, and what I mean by that is I've always considered Florida the last frontier of the United States of America. Even though it was established many years ago, it was really like settled later than everybody else. Like even like the westward movement and everything like that, and then things started sprawling and building up and everything like that. But as far as coming down to Florida, it wasn't really until like Flagler built the railroad and AC got invented, and
right. Look, grizzly bears are one thing, but they're not mosquitoes.
Right, exactly. Right. So it was like tough living down here before like technology like caught up with it. Like that's just the honest truth. So for guys like me, like I was born here in Florida, but my whole family's from New Jersey. Right. So there's a lot of people that move down here thinking, oh, I just want my little piece of paradise, and they didn't really think ahead, right, to how that would affect everything else that's going on in the state, the things that we're facing now.
Yep.
Maybe some people did, but not everybody. Most people didn't. So now you got people that are growing up here now, not like you're generationally Florida, but you got people that are growing up now, having kids here and growing families here, and these kids are growing up here, and they're seeing things like, man, when I grew up here, this is not how it was. There was a lot more space. There was a lot that we just did things differently. Right. And I think now the people are catching up to Florida and understanding what Florida truly is and why it needs to be protected, and why it's so precious.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's also a component to that comes, look, we're all born and raised in Florida, multi-generations from here. There's a pride that comes with that. And there's also a baseline understanding of what the good old days were. When you see all new people moving to Florida as people that have their grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents were here, we have a responsibility to teach those newcomers to Florida about what this place really is and what the threats are. Otherwise, their baseline of what good fishing or healthy ecosystems is artificial. It's you would just trend down with each generation and so that's something that like doing a podcast like this is hopefully the people that have seen and experienced these losses and struggles that we have, hopefully they're empowered to use their voice, but also hopefully the people who maybe just moved here last month that are getting into fishing or maybe just like your artwork, hear this and realize that there's these struggles that face this paradise that they moved to that they didn't know existed. Yeah. And they need to get educated on them and realize that there's a threat to losing, the best place on the planet.
100%.
Go to your local boat ramp. That's not the only thing they need to be educated on. How to pack a trailer.
That's the truth. Yeah, I got a couple of artist friends of mine that are in California, and they listen to the show because then they're always saying, "Man, I love hearing about all the Everglades stuff." They're like, we had no idea. So it is kind of cool to be able to, you know what I mean? Hopefully, I mean, I hope people are listening. We're I'm trying to bring like quality content and quality, information to the forefront, and and culture, and have some fun along the way. But at the end of the day, there is a mission of conservation on the show, because it's important. It's the most important thing we face here in Florida. So I don't know, trying.
Oh, it's working. I know people are listening.
Yeah. I want to get into a little bit of the Big Sugar lawsuit.
Okay.
Right. So this is really something that you guys are pushing pretty hard lately. I want to know why, and I want to know what's up. Like, what are the details on this?
So basically, the sugar industry filed a lawsuit in federal court against the Army Corps of Engineers because I'm oversimplifying this, that they wanted more water from the Everglades agricultural area reservoir, which is that reservoir that's the heart of Everglades restoration that Chris spoke to earlier. And that lawsuit made
for the EAA?
They want it for irrigation for the EAA.
So they're trying to get all this mandated before it's even really finished? Or
if you actually look, that you referenced that Senate Bill 2508 and how the fishing industry showed up ultimately to kill that bill. That bill would have threatened the Everglades agricultural area reservoir by taking the dedicated funding that was allocated for that project and making it available to other projects. They in essence would have defunded the project by spending it on other more ancillary projects. So that bill was pushed by the sugar industry. They see that reservoir, massive reservoir, think about it again, larger than the size of Manhattan, 20 foot deep of water, 25 foot deep. They see that as a competition to water supply for them. That water is going to the Everglades. That means it's not available to them. And they just want that as an over and above insurance policy. It's not water they necessarily need. It's water they want guaranteed in case they were to need it in case of a once in 100-year drought, where meanwhile the rest of the system's suffering, every other year. And so the function of that first threat was that 2508. They were unsuccessful. The governor vetoed that bill. That reservoir is under construction now. It's being built. And what this lawsuit does in the kind of negotiating process there, the Army Corps allocated, water managers allocate to where some of the water in that reservoir has to be allocated for the sugar industry, for the Everglades agricultural area. It's like the bottom third. What they're pushing for is to say that they should be made whole on water supply guarantees that they had in the past. And the way that they should be made whole is by, instead of making that water in the reservoir available to the Everglades, which is why the project exists in the first place, that they should get the water. So they should make up that loss of guarantee by allocating the water in the reservoir to them instead of sending it to the Everglades. And the big impact there is what it does to the operations of the reservoir. If that reservoir functions as intended as a water supply tool for the Everglades, for Florida Bay, it would take water in the wet season, and it would empty that reservoir out throughout the dry season, so that when you entered the next wet season, the reservoir was empty, so it had capacity to take more water from the lake. If you treat that reservoir as a water supply backup for the sugar industry, what that means is
you can't release it.
You don't release it. You hold it high through the dry season to make sure that they can make it through the dry season with the water they need, even though they haven't suffered a crop loss due to water supply since the early 80s.
How are they getting their water now? It's just
Lake Okeechobee and rain. And so
why wouldn't they just continue taking it
well,
from
they
the
do,
lake?
but they want more then they don't suffer. They want more than what they need in case. It's an insurance. And so in order to achieve that, the way you would function that reservoir then is you would hold it full through the dry season. Well, if you hold it full through the dry season until it starts raining, where they don't need the water supply anymore, now there's no capacity to take more water out of the system. So it just becomes a stagnant full reservoir. The benefits of the reservoir as a whole are eliminated. It's not sending water to the Everglades, and now it can't lower Lake Okeechobee because it's already full. It completely flip-flops what the operations of the reservoir would be. And so that's the threat of this lawsuit. They first tried to kill the project by defunding it because they saw it as a threat to their water supply. Now that it's being built and it's under construction, they're trying to basically get the water that would be in the reservoir to be held in the reservoir in case they need it. And in doing so, would eliminate the entire reason why the reservoir exists in the first place.
It just seems weird that they would want, I don't know, the logic that they would want that, just because wouldn't that like continually keep flowing, because the lake's always going to be high and it's always going to need to go into the reservoir, right? So
well, no, the lake's not always high, and they want the lake as high as possible. When you look at you look at LOSOM that will go into effect later this year, they were advocating for a high lake, because a high lake means water available to them.
Right.
Once that water is south of the EAA and is going down to Florida Bay, it's no longer available to them. And they see that as a threat. They just want this guarantee. It's like they don't need all that water, but they want it just in case they need it. Even though that means operating the system completely opposite than what the rest of the system requires. And you can see that in how the system is operated now. You look at what was happening with the water conservation areas and how much water was in WCA 3 down around the Miccosukee village, coming out of, basically from Ian, from the hurricane that destroyed our town. You had this super wet, dry season. You had hurricane that dumped a ton of water into the system. And you had where the water conservation area 3A was way above schedule, and the tree islands were flooded out. The whole system was full. Lake Okeechobee was too high. The water conservation areas were too high. But you had almost 500,000 acres in the EAA that was kept artificially dry for optimal growing conditions. Nobody else had optimal anything. Tree islands were flooded. Plants, animals were drowning. The lake ecology of the lake was going to everywhere in the system was inundated, except for the EAA, where you've got 500,000 acres that was being kept perfectly dry throughout the wet season. If you look at what the actual rainfall was into water conservation area 3A, if you took out what was being drained out of the EAA to keep it dry during the wet season, water conservation area 3A would have been within a normal wet year schedule. What put that over into a flood schedule was the fact that you had 500,000 acres that you pulled, a foot and a half of water out of, 2 feet of water. That's 1 million acre feet of water that you were putting on top of. And so managing this big section of land south of Lake Okeechobee in the middle of the system, managing it completely opposite from what the rest of the system requires, throws an imbalance in the whole system.
Such a tangled web.
And so they want their water supply, so they want the lake really high because that means more water available to them.
Right.
But then they also want their drainage, which means they don't want to be flooded. And so if in order to keep us dry, we'll flood the tree islands.
Right.
And so you can't take this, massive area of land in the middle of the system and manage it the complete opposite of the way the system functions. It doesn't work. And that's the status quo. That's what they're pushing to keep. And so it's just it just goes to show, whether we're talking about hoarding water in a reservoir that's being built or whether we're talking about, providing perfect dry, conditions for growing there when the rest of the system is inundated, they've always enjoyed this perfect conditions all the time when every part of the other system around them is suffering, and they see any deviation from the status quo as a threat to the status quo, and they're the only ones that benefit from it, and they're fighting hard politically to keep it the way it is, keep it the same.
Are the discharges that are happening, like the algae blooms and everything like that, is that purely from the lake, like the algae blooms and the dirty water and stuff like that? I mean, are you guys considering that's mostly from just the water releases, or is like runoff and everything like that playing a big deal?
As far as local basin runoff?
Yeah, like the things that are going out to the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's what got this thing started in the first place, right? I mean, like, just seeing all that dirty water come out.
That was the big visual.
That's a really, like...
That was the big crisis.
Right, that's the big postcard everyone saw.
Yeah, there's obvious inputs from the local watershed that are issues. And you have kind of two impacts. You've got water quality that's impact, which is the algae blooms, the high nutrients that fuel those algae blooms. And then you've got water quantity, which is, even if the water was perfectly clear, if you're dumping 10,000 cubic feet per second of water out the Caloosahatchee River, you're turning a saltwater fish fresh.
Yeah.
It kills the oysters, kills the seagrass. It's not the algae that's killing the oysters and seagrass, it's the low salinity levels. Or in Florida Bay, it's the high salinity levels because they're not getting the water that they need. The other is the algae blooms. And so when we see those massive, there's pollution issues in all the local watersheds, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But we don't see the massive, widespread catastrophe, collapse that we saw in 16 and that we saw in 18, 19 until we get those discharges from the lake. And as we saw there, you saw massive cyanobacteria blooms, blue-green algae on Lake Okeechobee, big high volume discharges to the coast. With those discharges came the algae, and it just blew up as it got into that slower moving area in the canals and stuff along the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie River. And then also that nutrient load then came in contact with red tide, which was on the coast, which was it's a natural thing, but what happened was we started supercharging it. It's like you have a forest fire from a lightning strike, and it does its thing, and it kind of burns itself out of fuel and goes away. Those discharges were like dumping fuel on the forest fire. So they were getting much more intense and lasting much longer than they naturally would. So yes, it's not the only problem. But those massive discharges from Lake Okeechobee to the coast are that's where I reference, that's the broadhead through the kidney.
Yeah.
You've got the watershed issues that you always have, but we don't get crippled, we don't get put on life support until we get those massive discharges. And that's why the EAA reservoir and Everglades restoration is so important, is it handles the brunt of that trauma.
Right. This November we have something on the ballot, right to hunt and fish. I want to get your take on that. If you guys are able to comment on it. We always say yes on to, because we want to codify our constitutional right for hunting and fishing and preserving the lands. I mean, do you guys have a point of view on that?
I mean, we focus specifically on Everglades restoration. I don't know really enough about that. I don't know that there's a threat to our constitutional rights here in Florida. I mean, I don't know, and I don't know enough about it to know what the motivating factor is there. We part of the reason why we are very effective is, look, we're a small organization in fighting one of the the status quo, and the status quo is being pushed by one of the biggest political power players in the state of Florida, being the sugar industry.
Right. And
for us to be successful, we stay laser focused on Everglades restoration. We don't do mission creep into other areas, and also that's something that is that's a purely political initiative.
Mm-hmm.
We're a 501c3. We're an education and advocacy outreach organization. We do not endorse candidates. We don't condone candidates. We don't give money to candidates or politicians. And so we are also very limited on what we can do as far as lobbying, as far as our resource allocation. And so the little bit of
what? Yeah, that's my mistake, because I didn't put two and two together about before asking that. I probably shouldn't even asked you that in light of that. And I knew that.
The little bit of resource that we can put towards grassroots lobbying and lobbying, we hold that powder dry for Everglades restoration.
Yeah, you know what? I wasn't putting two and two together about the 501c3 and the whole voting thing and stuff like that, so I probably shouldn't even ask you guys that question.
It's all good. It's all good. We're a community of anglers and hunters, and
that's why I asked it for that reason.
Yeah.
We just haven't dove into it because it's not in our wheelhouse.
Yep. So short term and long term, what do you want to see happen here? Short term, and what's your long view on this stuff that you face, the things that your mission?
Yeah, well, I can start off and Chris can close it out. But going back to what we said earlier, I think with our mission, what we have seen, and I think it's evidenced directly by the sugar industry's influence. They are spending triple the amount of money that they spent. I'm saying double the amount of money that they spent. I'm not sure exactly what the statistic is. More money than they have spent in the past, over the past decade. As more money has been spent, their influence has waned because of this groundswell that has been created by these different constituency groups, anglers, hunters, the businesses that we spoke about earlier, the tourism related businesses all banding together, the outdoor industry brands all coming together and saying enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. So they have been overshadowed, I would say. They still have incredible influence in Tallahassee with leadership in the House and the Senate at the state level. And they spend a lot of money on lobbyists and campaign contributions. And so we are constantly, up against that fight. But there are chinks in the armor, and we have made progress. You've seen it. You saw the defeat of Senate Bill 2508. You saw us able to defeat a damaging provision they tried to put in the Water Resources Development Act in 2019. I mean, we have had successes where they have been dealt losses politically that they have not ever been dealt in their existence. And they've suffered those losses in the past 10 years. Now, you also, at the same time, there's other things going on at the national level. There's a movement. People are trying to eat healthier. People are consuming less sugar. There's other peripheral issues going on that are contributing. But so short, that's always a battle for us and will continue to be a battle. And that outlook politically, especially at the state level, that changes. And we're always having to be on guard and monitoring every single bill, every single amendment, everything that comes out of Tallahassee, because we never know we don't know what's coming. So I would say that right now, that is what I see as, the greatest threat politically, and short term and long term. Chris, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I would say what we would like to see short term is continuing the momentum and progress that we've seen the last 5 years. And in the world of Everglades restoration and conservation, the term short term or long term's kind of like what, to me, short term is 5 years here.
Right. That's kind of what I'm thinking too. Yeah, for sure. But I'm all right. So what does the young adult in you still want to see here right now? What does the old man want to see?
What I want to see is I want to see the progress that's being made at the pace that it's being made continued, and the most critical component to that happening is people staying engaged and being educated so that they can see through the propaganda and division and deflection that are threats to those people being engaged. What I want to see long term is, 50 years from now, looking back and being able to, people being able to look back and say, this effort that was at one point thought to be impossible, and this restoration project that was larger than anything that had ever been attempted in the history of the world was a success. The Everglades were saved. The ecosystems can coexist with all the other businesses that make up Florida, including sugar, and that it's a lesson or a case study that the rest of the threats to any of the most important resource on the planet, which is water, that those threats can be addressed and those challenges and problems can be solved. And there's a very famous quote that the Everglades is a test. If we pass, we might get to keep the planet. And I mean, it's pretty extreme, but it's true. It's like we have an opportunity here to set the bar for we can achieve what's thought to be impossible or what's thought to be so monumental that myself, for the first half of my life, wasn't involved because I didn't see any hope that such a massive problem could be tackled. That mindset shifts so that the generations that come that may face problems that we don't even know exist today can see this as a roadmap to addressing those issues in the future.
Excellent. I'm going to ask you a fun question.
All right.
That I like to ask. I like to ask every time I get a captain across the table from me, especially after he's had a glass of rum. Right.
All right. Yes, I like rum.
All right. So let's talk some fishing here real quick. I want to ask you, what's the one that got away? We all got the one that got away.
Are we talking about fish? Or?
Talking about fish. Talking about fish. We're talking about fish. I want to know because we all got one. So what's your one that got away? Tell me that story.
All right. So the one that got away for me, it's funny. I've lost a lot of fish and watched clients lose a lot of fish, but probably the fish that sticks in my memory, which was one that led me, kind of fueled my passion to want to catch fish or want to be successful.
To find it again?
Yeah, was I don't know how old I was. I know I was in elementary school. I lived on Sanibel Island. I went to Sanibel Elementary, and my weekends consisted of riding my bike down to the Lighthouse Pier on the south end of Sanibel and fishing for snook or black drum or whatever was under the pier. And I would sit out there all night. Our parents would drop us off. We'd ride our bike, and we'd be out there all night long. And I remember the first time I dangled a needlefish on a Penn Senator, boat rod down under that pier, and had a massive snook absolutely school me under the pier. And I was young enough to where I cried.
Oh.
Okay? I was pretty upset. But that fish, that was I don't know, 35, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I remember that fish, and I remember after that, like, every thought was how do I go back with stronger tackle? What if I did
Right.
a better position? What if I, to land that fish the next time?
Yeah, the ones you lose are the ones that teach you, right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, cool,
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, listen, I really, really appreciate you guys stopping by today, hanging out with me, having a glass of rum, and
No, thank you.
you know what I mean, and just sharing some of the captain. I know we got real technical today. That was to our audience saying that, but I think it was necessary to get technical because it's a technical issue.
It is. It's a complex issue, and it's a big problem and a big issue, and you do have to get a little bit into the weeds on it. But
yeah.
But no, we're grateful to be here, man.
Awesome.
Yeah. And you've dedicated so much of your life's work to conservation, and we recognize and appreciate that, and really appreciate your partnership too. So
I thank you. So if you guys want to support Captains for Clean Water, go to captainsforcleanwater.org, right? And I think the rest is self-explanatory there. Once you get to the site, you'll know what to do.
Yep.
And you guys have any events coming up?
No, we've got some guide events.
You just had your gala.
Yeah, we had a gala
up in
month
Jupiter
or so ago up in Jupiter. Big kind of outreach event for the East Coast community over there. We have a couple of guide rendezvous that are guide outreach events that are coming up in September and October, end of September, beginning of October. There's one over in Jensen at Rufus's place at River
Punk. Yeah, nice.
Yep. There's one down in Almirada, and then there's one over in Fort Myers. So any of the fishing guides listening, we'd love to have you there. All you have to be got to be a fishing guide, and it's free, no charge, and it's great outreach. We do kind of an immersion on Everglades restoration and State of the Union. We got great food. We've got Captain Mike Holliday puts on some guide games, Olympics, and casting competitions.
Right.
And it's a good time. So we'd love to.
Life of the party that holiday,
yes,
right?
he is, always.
Awesome. All right, we're going to end this like we always do. Jessica, thank you very much. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And give my best to Daniel. Tell him feel better soon.
He's jealous, and I told him
come back.
He'll have his time.
Yeah, tell him come back. All right, cool. Raise a glass. Your ego is not your amigo. Always do your best at the end of the day. Just let God do the rest, and do not ever forget. No matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we're all connected by water.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Yep.